Hello, tiny friends. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be creating a vintage cooler for this Ol'Camper. I chose this 1970s Coleman cooler with the wire handles. I really like the way it looks, and I think it's going to be fitting for this Ol'Camper. I'm going to create the insulated part of the cooler out of polymer clay, and I'm going to use this wooden block to shape the clay into the cooler. The first thing I'm going to do is wrap the wooden block with this aluminum foil so that the clay doesn't stick to it. Today I'm going to use Sculpey souffle clay. It's soft enough to work with, but it's pretty firm and durable. After baking, it has a matte finish and it feels like suede. It can also tend to get really sticky and hard to work with if it's too warm, but this pack is pretty old, so I really didn't have that issue. I'm going to warm it up and then run it through the pasta machine a few times to get the thickness that I want. Now that I got a nice strip cut out, I'm just going to go ahead and start with cutting out the bottom first. Once I got the bottom piece on, then I can go ahead and measure how much I actually need. So I'm just going to trim away the excess. And I'm just completely eyeballing this, but I'm cutting around a quarter of it off. Now I can begin to wrap the wooden block with my strip. Now I'm starting here at this corner section, but I really didn't mean to. I really meant to start in the middle of this side section. So if you try this, you might want to start there and not on the corner. I just feel like the corner would be a weaker section to add the connecting point, even though this clay does state that it doesn't break easy in thinner areas. But I'm just pressing the clay firmly against the block to make sure that there's no air, no gaps, and it's nice and smooth and pressed tightly against the block. Okay, I've cut off the excess and I'm just kind of rounding off and smoothing out my connecting points and my corner edges. The tray is helping me do that, but I'm going to move on to a smoothing tool. So this is kind of like a little spoon, and it works really well to smooth your clay down. The cooler has a curved bottom and curved corners, so I'm just blending all my connecting points and pieces together so that it looks like one whole piece. This will give it a little more security and make it stronger. I really do like working with this clay because I'm able to work with it without misshaping what I've already done, and that could be because this pack is super old and it's really stiff. But it really does feel nice and smooth and a lot like suede. A new pack may not be so ideal to work with since it tends to get pretty sticky if it's really warm. But I haven't experienced any of the downside issues during this project. For the corner, where the two sides are connected, I mainly focused on blending the top and the bottom completely since those areas are going to be seen. I did blend the midsection a little bit, but not completely because I felt like that was going to be safe enough because I'll be wrapping the cooler after it's baked. And I was only focusing on the visibility and not the durability. I noticed that the bottom of the cooler has texture around it, so I'm going to use this toothbrush to add texture all around the bottom of the cooler. Okay, I baked my clay and it is cooled. I only baked it for half of the time because I'm going to add more clay to it and bake it again. Right now it's safe enough to remove it from the block and peel away the foil. The corner where I connected the two ends together came undone because I didn't smooth it down all the way. I only did the top and the bottom. This is an easy fix if you have liquid Sculpey on hand, or you can add more clay to it. So this was a total error on my part and not the clay. You just want to make sure that all of your connecting points are completely fused together and blended, making sure to focus on the weaker areas to give your piece the maximum strength. Before I do anything to it, I'm going to very carefully use this mini emery board and file down all the areas that need it. This helps remove any blemishes and even out any uneven areas. I'm adding some liquid Sculpey to the corner that needs to be mended on the inside and the outside, and I'm just smoothing it down with my finger. I'm also going to add it to the inside corners just for added security. I want the contents of the cooler to sit right on top, so I need to use some clay to fill in the cooler, and I'll just be layering the liquid Sculpey and the unbaked clay as I go along. I'm going to fill the cooler about a third of the way and leave the top part empty. The liquid Sculpey has many advantages to it. You can use it as a softener, adding it to super hard clay, making it softer and easier to work with. You can use it as a glue, gluing fresh clay to already baked clay and fixing your broken clay. You can use it as a filler, a sealer, and a fuser, fusing your clay together. Now, I don't really know if it has an expiration date for sure, but apparently it has a really super long shelf life because this bottle is over 12 years old and it still works really great. It's just a little more gooey. It does state that the Sculpey souffle clay has a bit of a flexibility after it's baked. Even though I won't be needing that feature today, it's always best to know the features of the type of clay that you're using so that you can pick a suitable clay for the piece that you're creating. I went ahead and pre-painted a half a sheet of cardstock with this apple barrel English ivy green, and I think it's the perfect color for this cooler. While the clay is baking, I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 strips. And because I'm so impatient and I just want to move on, I'm just going to eyeball this and hope for the best. The second strip that I cut is going to be slightly larger than the first strip. Hopefully, I'll just be able to use one of these and not have to cut another strip. Meanwhile, I need to create some ice cubes. So I'm going to use a silicone mold and some UV resin. This mold has a variety of cube sizes, and I'm just going to use the tiniest ones. The tiniest ones come in an 8-pack. So I'm just going to do a couple rounds of this to create some ice, and I'm going to use this wooden toothpick to level out the resin. Then I can go ahead and cure the resin and have some ice for my cooler. My cooler is ready to paint, so I'm going to use white acrylic paint to paint it. And some of you may be wondering, why am I painting the white clay with white paint? Well, for those of you that don't know, clay gets super dirty when you're working with it. It's almost impossible to keep any colored clay clean, especially light colors. So painting it helps hide the dirt and give it a fresh start, even though you know it's going to be dirty later on. Now that my paint is dry, I can go ahead and pick one of those pre-cut strips. So it looks like I'm going to be choosing the larger one out of the two. And I'm just going to add some tacky glue to this and glue it around the cooler. After adding the paper, I noticed that some of the white was still exposed where the two ends meet, and they weren't exactly even. So I'm going to use the green paint to fill those areas in so that it's not so noticeable. I'm going to be using the green paint to touch up any areas that is needed. And I'm also going to do this with the white paint as well. Here's what the cooler looks like so far. And now it's time to add some details. For the logo, I didn't want to take the time to print one out, so I'm going to roughly sketch one. I'm using a white gel pen, and since I can't really write that tiny, I'm just going to roughly sketch it out and make it look like the Coleman logo from a distance. But up close, it'll just be chicken scratch and a scribble of gibberish. This was the most challenging part of this project. So I sketched out a few different ones and sizes to give myself some options. The gel pen wasn't really white enough for me, so I switched over to white acrylic paint to paint the outline of the logo. I'm painting it a lot thicker than it really is so that I don't have to really stress and worry about it. This way, when I cut it out, I can cut it down to a thinner outline, making it look more like the original logo. I also need to round off the corners just like the real logo. Now I can just choose which one looks best on the cooler. Since it's paper to paper, I'm just going to use tacky glue on the back side and place the logo on the front side of the cooler. One of my family members came in and said, "That looks like a Coleman cooler." Not only was I very surprised and quite impressed by this knowledge of vintage coolers, it also gave me great confirmation that I was heading in the right direction with this unfinished miniature replica. Now it's time to make the handles, and they have this very distinctive shape. I did begin using aluminum wire, but later on I switched it out to a stiffer wire because the aluminum wire can still bend out of shape down the road after the cooler is completed, and I just didn't feel safe with that. But the process is still the same. So in this clip, I am using the aluminum wire. I'm also going to hand drill the holes to install the handles. I'm still not very good at working with wire, but I do think I'm getting a little better and making a little more progress. Every time I do this, I learn something new that helps me out along the way. And this time I chose to bend both of the wires together at the same time to make sure that they would be the same size and pretty even with each other. And it really worked out for the best. I'm going to use my dotting tool and white acrylic paint to mimic the supports that sit around the holes for the handles. I'm doing this a few times to build that piece up to actually look like individual pieces that I've placed around the holes. Afterwards, I did clean it up a bit with some more paint. In my inspiration photos of the original cooler, you don't really see any hand grips for the handles. Maybe it once had them and they fell off because they were usually made of hard plastic and they usually cracked and broke. I'm going to add some to this cooler using a piece of cardstock, and I'm just going to give it a head start by curling it around a skinny stick. I'm adding a little bit of tacky glue to the end of the strip, and then I'm going to place the wire down and press it firmly against the paper. Place the wire all the way to the bottom, leaving just a tiny bit of the paper exposed, enough that I can just bend that around the wire. But first, I'm going to let the glue dry completely because it's going to be easier to wrap the paper around the wire once the glue is dried. Once it's dried and I know it's not going to move around on me, I can continue to wrap it. I'm just adding a little bit of glue as I go along. I'm only going to wrap it a couple times because I don't want it to be too thick. And I also want to make sure that it's wrapped tightly around itself. I'm going to trim off the excess, leaving just enough paper to add a little bit of glue and seal it off. Once I close this piece, I can then just roll it around and help shape it a little more. I'm going to finish off these handle grips with a little bit of matte varnish by Duraclear, and I'm going to coat them with 2 layers of varnish, letting each layer dry in between. Now I can go ahead and age the cooler, but I don't want it to look really old. I just want it to look adequately used. So I'm going to use the deep yellow ochre earth pigments to tone down some of that stark white. I just don't want it to look so brand new and stick out like a sore thumb when I put everything together. Next, I'm going to go ahead and spot it with some antique wax. Now, normally I would use brown chalk pastels for this, but I want to show how you can also age with the antique wax. I don't really want it to look like rust, maybe in the beginning stages or some corroded dirt. So I'm just going to add this sporadically around the cooler where I think that would be sitting. While the antique wax is still wet, I'm going to go over it with a cotton stick that I dipped in water just to blend it out and smear it around just a little bit. Now I can seal the cooler off with some varnish. For the green part, I'm using a layer of triple thick, and for the white, I'm using a layer of matte varnish by Duraclear. Once that varnish dries, I can go ahead and add the handles. I'm not going to glue the handles into place. They'll just sit nicely inside the holes and they won't fall out. And they'll still be able to move if I want them to. Bending the wires together at the same time really helped to make sure that these two pieces were the same exact size and they pretty much matched up with each other. Now I can add some fun to this cooler. Here are my ice cubes, and for its contents, I have 2 cans of Colt 45 beer. I also have a can of Budweiser, but this can is open, so I'm not going to put it in the cooler. I'm going to add it to the table. I'm using UV resin because I want the ice to look melty. And I found 2 cans of soda in my stash, an old Dr. Pepper and a Tab soda. That was an exciting find because to me, nothing screams more 70s than a can of Tab soda. I'm starting off with a thin layer of resin. Not a lot, just enough to lock the pieces into place. And I'll add more as I go along. And for the last step, I need to tone down these handles. So I'm just going over them with a little bit of that deep yellow ochre earth pigments. I almost forgot about this, but there is no way these handles are still going to look that white. Here you go, tiny friends, another vintage replica for this Ol'Camper, and this piece has definitely made it to my favorite miniatures. I hope you all have enjoyed today's episode. It was super fun to make this little cooler. I can't wait to put everything all together. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. And don't forget to give it a like and hit that thumbs up button. And if this is your first time visiting TinyKeyHoleMinis and you would like to see more of my miniature creations, please help my channel grow and click that subscribe button because it's totally free and I truly appreciate it. And if you have missed any of the previous episodes in this miniature series of this Ol'Camper and would like to see them, don't worry. I have added a link to the playlist for this series in the description box below. There, you can see all of the miniature creations that I have made so far for this miniature camper. And as always, I'd like to thank you all for watching, for all of your support, and welcome all my new subscribers. Thank you all so much. And until next time, tiny friends, I hope you all have a lovely day, and I will see you all on the mini side.